And welcome back to the First and Goal podcast. My name is Lewis, and next to me, as always, is my beautiful co-host, Laraib, as we are here and excited to break down week 16 of the NFL season. Laraib, happy holidays. We are filming this on Boxing Day, aka December 26th, after a full 16-game slate of NFL games from this past weekend, including games yesterday on Christmas that we'll be breaking down today. It is playoff time, Laraib. 2 weeks away. We're getting really excited. We're going to be breaking it all down in this episode. Anything you would say before we hop into the picks?
No, just happy holidays to everyone. And let's just jump right in, Lewis, because the picks are over officially for the rest of the year. No matter what happens, I have one for the regular season. So it's time to look forward to the playoffs. Now, of course, my lock and my upset hit, that was been a big theme for me this year, as my upset has banged a couple weeks and has won me them. And now sitting here pretty for the rest of the season with 2 weeks left to go. I'm feeling real good.
Yeah, that was a good upset pick. That was my philosophy, was always pick the best team who's upset eligible. I got too cute. I drank too much of the Saints Kool-Aid. And yeah, at least we don't have to talk about that garbage team anymore. We can focus on the better teams. But congratulations, Laura. As you know, it's not over because come playoff time, that's when these picks really make a difference. But I'll give you the regular season. Congrats. It's your first time beating me in a regular season. So I'll give you that. I can't beat you every year. Like you mentioned, locks upsets were my Achilles heel this year. I got way too cute, but I'll just leave it at that. Congratulations, Laura.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to our topics for the day. We will start with the biggest game of the weekend, one of the biggest upsets of the NFL season, at least according to some, myself included, where Baltimore goes into San Francisco and wallops them 33-19. That score is not indicative to how lopsided this matchup really was. And I want to break this game down kind of like big picture, but I want to start with the 49ers, who have been riding so high. And I know we bring it up every week. This season, it's when you're up, you fall down, you crash hard, and it's been happening to every team. So I don't want to kill the 49ers. I think they're still fine. My biggest takeaways were Brock Purdy just had an awful game, throwing the ball. Now, how injured is he? Or is this maybe a sign of things to come? Because, Laraib, what I noticed from that game is when they got down early and he was throwing the interceptions, that they kind of took a conservative approach throwing the ball, which is like, if you're down, most teams, they just start chucking. It's like when you're down in an NBA game, the team losing just starts shooting threes and shoot. If they go in, you could make a run, but if not, then at least you tried. But it was still that conservative, a lot of screens, the short passes, just really conservative game plans for Brock Purdy, where it's like, come playoff time, if you're trailing in a game like you were in this one, it feels like Kyle Shanahan isn't exactly confident that he can let Brock Purdy take over a game and come back in a big spot. Maybe he just doesn't think Brock's capable of doing that. I don't know. We saw Trent Williams go down in this game. Maybe he was just trying to not risk anything with Brock Purdy. We don't want any injuries going forward. But this game got out of hand quickly, Larob, and it was very uncharacteristic from what we've seen from the 49ers. So what do you think that does this game cause major concern for you if you're a 49ers fan?
I don't think so, Lewis. Now, the good thing is for this 49ers team, they will not face a defense of this caliber until they get to the Super Bowl if they have to play this Ravens team again. If you look at the other defenses over there in the NFC that they face in the playoffs, the Cowboys really don't strike that much fear in you. After the past couple of weeks, have slowly declined. The Eagles, of course, we know their secondary can be got, and there's a team they've already destroyed before. And the Lions, giving up a lot of points to Nick Mullins this past weekend. So that's the one silver lining from this game. Now, the issue is, and what the issue has been all season long for this team, has been their ability to come back, right? They've had, the losses they've had this season, they've struggled to really come back in those games and, win those sort of games. And it really relies on their run game, right? When you aren't able to run the ball in this 49ers offense, it really limits what else they can do. Now they're sitting here at 11-4, tied with the Eagles and tied with the Lions. but they're still at the number one seed, Lewis. But it looks like it's going to be a tight race coming down to the wire. And of course, Brock Purdy dropping out of the MVP conversation. Thank the Lord we don't have to deal with that this year. But, going back to the issue for this game, like I mentioned, when you can't run the ball, it just really limits this 49ers offense.
Yeah, and you're right, because they're so used to kind of game planning around the run game. And it kind of felt like they abandoned it a little too early in that game against the Ravens, which is a little strange by Kyle. It kind of seemed like they gave up. I'm not going to go that far, but that was the feeling of how they approached the game whenever they did fall into that hole. Even though they got the safety early, the momentum seemed like it was going to swing their way. But I really feel like they will be able to rebound. I'm not too concerned with the 49ers. I still think they are the favorites in the conference. There were some concerns with the pass rush really not being able to get to Lamar and the really shifty quarterbacks. But like you mentioned, there's no Lamar Jackson in the NFC. Jalen Hurts has been pretty hobbled this season, and Dak really isn't like that, moving around. So it seems like a team that will be fine come playoff time as long as the matchups really get in their favor. But I'm not too concerned. And as for the Ravens, Laraib, was a huge win for them this season, a statement win on the road against a Super Bowl caliber team that firmly cements them as not only a great shot to get the one seed in the AFC, and they control their own destiny just by winning out and getting that, but it cements them as, it feels like at this point, Laura, they are the clear-cut team to beat in the AFC. Do you agree with that?
I have to. I mean, you just look at the type of performance that they had defensively. All the pressure they got on Brock Purdy kind of forced him into those errors. And then even on the offensive side of the ball, we always talk about this Ravens team lacking a number one wide receiver. They lost Mark Andrews, but still, Lamar Jackson's shiftiness in the pocket, his ability to extend plays and just go for those long runs is just can't be, matched by any other team. Even with 50-year-old Gus Edwards out there toting the ball, it still looks like they're able to have that power running attack like they usually do over there in Baltimore. And Zay Flowers is really emerging as a go-to guy for Lamar Jackson. So it's just a really impressive win by this team. Now, they're going to still want to win next week. Miami coming into town. This is going to be another big test for them in back-to-back weeks. But if they win that game, they're securely holding on to that one seed. And it looks like the AFC playoffs will go through Baltimore this year.
Right. And it's kind of the thing with Baltimore this whole year has been just some of the inconsistent play, the maybe playing down to their competition. But if this is their team peaking at the right time and they just build onto this come playoff time, then they seriously are the biggest threat. I still can't count out Kansas City, even despite what we saw last week. Maybe I'm just a prisoner of my past bias, but you know, it's still hard to think that the Andy Reid Mahomes brain trust won't be able to get it done in these huge moments that we haven't seen Lamar. We've seen Harbaugh, we haven't seen Lamar in these huge pressure moments come through. So obviously tonight was a huge, or last night was a huge pressure moment where he did indeed come through. So we'll see what happens come playoff time. Losing a guy like Keaton Mitchell, the running back, who had a lot of juice, last week, and they still kind of survived. But let's see how successful the running game is going forward. And I know Lamar does so much for that running game, but you mentioned you're relying on guys like Gus Edwards and Justice Hill to be your primary backs come playoff time. That is a concern for me. But the rest of the team, we saw the defense really lock down. That secondary looked very impressive against the 49ers. So a lot of things looking good for the Ravens. But guess what, Larob? They're the team on top right now. So we'll see what happens with Miami next week. But if things keep going the way they've been going all season long, that could be a very interesting game. Well, let's go ahead, Larob. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that game last night?
No, let's go ahead and move on, Lewis, to the NFC playoff picture. Now, this is going to be a real tight race down to the finish. A lot of 8-7 teams, a lot of 7-8 teams, Lewis. And looking at the current picture, you have the Rams at the 6 seed, my Seahawks at the 7, Minnesota at the 8, and Atlanta at the 9, and Green Bay and New Orleans still lingering there at the 10 and 11 spots, Lewis. This is going to be a really fun race to watch, and it's going to be a lot of teams who don't deserve to make it, and maybe a couple teams who deserve it and miss out. But I think this is going to be really fun to watch.
Well, let's start at the top because, the 49ers, the rest of their schedule, um, isn't too bad. They do play the Rams in the last week, but they get the who do they play next week? They don't play a great team. They play a team they should be able to beat next week. So it feels like if things kind of go the way we think they're going to go, it feels like the 49ers are going to keep the 1 seed. Eagles probably hang on to the NFC East, so that means they would be the 2 seed. And then you have Detroit, who's already claimed and won their division. And then Tampa with the NFC South, Dallas. It feels like Tampa, Dallas, even though we have 2 weeks left, is kind of a confirmed playoff matchup. Uh,
I would like to
it,
have some pushback on that.
Go ahead.
Your New Orleans Saints
All right, so
going to Tampa Bay. Derek Carr, after a long rest from that Thursday night game, marches into Tampa and puts the bake show in his place after he's been playing really well for 2 weeks in a row. Tell me that's not a possibility, Lewis.
it sure is. And then when Tampa beats Carolina the next week, it'll be all for naught because the Saints have dug themselves a hole. It would be so Saints like to win the last 2 games of the season and finish with a positive record just to miss the playoffs because you couldn't win the games that actually mattered for your season. But that's my view on that horrid Saints program. But I think, Tampa, Dallas will be the matchup, the 4-5 matchup. And then it comes down to those last two playoff seeds, Rob. You have Los Angeles, you have Seattle, and then you have Green Bay. Minnesota still is in there, but they do have a tough last 2 games of the schedule, with the Lions and the Packers still remaining. So it'll be interesting to see how those teams play out. Me personally, Laurab, I would like to see the Rams and Seahawks remain the last 2 teams. I think they are just the most talent and the most spark, especially what we've seen from the Rams recently. I want to see those teams in. I want to see good games in the wild card. So I think those 2 teams will give you the best matchup. And as the matchups are stand right now, I know Philly really does not want to see this Los Angeles team going into Philly the way their defense has been playing. Seeing Matt Stafford with Puka and Cooper Kupp in there, just lighting that secondary up, Kyron Williams in the backfield. They have a lot of weapons that the Eagles, you know, recently, even in that Giants game, just guys getting wide open, runs breaking off for big, gains and everything. So it does scare me facing a hot offense like the Rams in a potential shootout game where, if the turnovers don't go your way, that could be it for your season right there. And then for the 3-6 matchup, if it is Seattle, that would be awesome because we've seen that game a few times, and including, week 2 of the season, overtime, high scoring thriller. I think everyone will be excited to see. But are there any other dark horses for you, Larup? I know you mentioned the Saints out of jest, but maybe not even the teams who are out of the playoff picture. Are there any dark horse contenders for you in this conference?
Contenders, I think the Detroit Lions have been playing some really good football. But it's just that defense, man. They're always letting up those cheap touchdowns at the end of games. And can we really trust Jared Goff on the road in a huge moment? I think that's going to be really, really difficult. Now, there's a team that is not currently in the playoffs that I kind of might have a feeling. Atlanta Falcons playing at Chicago and at New Orleans. Those are 2 very winnable games. And if Tampa Bay can lose to the Saints and lose to the Panthers potentially, that is a sneaky team that could make it, Lewis. But for the teams that are in, I really like what you mentioned. If the Lions win the 3 seed and my Seahawks get the 6 seed, I think that would be an amazing game to watch. Because what I don't want to see, Lewis, is Seattle at San Francisco for the 3rd time this year, or going to Philly in another hostile environment. I think that's just going to be a really tough game to win back to back this year.
Philly hasn't beat
Especially,
Seattle in 8 straight
I
times.
mean, for sure. But I think this one is just be a lot tougher matchup in Philadelphia. The Seahawks offense did not play well at all at Tennessee, and so I think Detroit would be our best matchup.
All right, and let's move over ahead to the other conference, Larav, the AFC, where there's still a lot of movement to be had. We mentioned the Miami-Baltimore game, which is going to be huge next week because that could very well determine the 1 seed. If Baltimore wins, that's it. They've already, they've won the conference. But if Miami wins out, if they beat, the Ravens this week and then the Bills, that's a tough 2 games, then they will win the 1 seed. So it's still a race at the top, which is super interesting come the end of the year because that means teams will be playing all season long. You can't afford to rest guys. It feels like the Chiefs are pretty cemented at that 3 spot after that disappointing loss to the Raiders. Although if they lose out and an AFC South team wins out, then potentially they could jump that spot, but I don't see that happening. So it feels pretty cemented that we're going to have Chiefs at the 3 and the AFC South winner, most likely the Jaguars at the 4, which leaves the final 3 seeds. I mean, Cleveland almost feels like a lock at this point with 10 wins, playing the Jets next week, and then they play the Bengals in the last week of the season. They'll be favored in both games. So then you have Buffalo as the current 6 seed at 9-6. You have Indy and Houston at 8-7, both AFC South teams also vying for the division. And then Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, also at 8-7 in the AFC North, with less tiebreaker luck, and then some other teams on the bottom, Laraib. So let's start at the top. Do you think it's going to end up as Baltimore, Miami, KC, Jaguars as it stands right now? Or do you see something else happening?
No, I'm gonna zag on this a little bit, Lewis. I like the Ravens to take the 1 seed, but for the 2 seed, I'm gonna go with the Buffalo Bills. I think if the Ravens
Mm.
handle business next week and the Bills also, win that week 18 matchup, they could very well win that division. And for the AFC South, Lewis, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars will win that. Unfortunately, because they have to play versus Carolina at Tennessee. Two teams have already packed it in for the season. Meanwhile, the Texans have a really easy schedule, and same for the Colts. They play each other
Now,
week
are the
18.
Jaguars just a lock? Because the effort that I saw last week against Tampa, and you even mentioned it to me, saying the Jaguars might be pretty fraudulent heading into the final weeks. There's no way they could maybe drop a game or two going into this final stretch?
Well, that's the thing, Lewis. It looks like Trevor Lawrence has some sort of shoulder sprain and he's questionable to
Right.
play. But versus, you're going to be at home for Carolina and you travel to Tennessee. That Tennessee game could be interesting if, there's some shenanigans going on with Trevor Lawrence getting hurt or just how bad this defense has been playing. But I think they pull out one of those games. And of course, their tiebreaker over the rest of the division will
Yeah,
kind
you're
of
right.
kind of just seal it for them. But I really like the Texans. I think if CJ Stroud comes back this week, beats Tennessee, beats the Colts on our Sunday Night Football Week 18 game to drag this Texans team into the playoffs, I think that would be really fun to watch.
So it does feel like we could have a potential win and get in situation with Houston and Indianapolis in week 17, which would be awesome because that's just a playoff game come a week early. So that would be really cool to see. But it feels like Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. Pittsburgh plays at Seattle this week. They lose that game, they're out. But they'll probably win the last week of the season because Mike Tomlin has to have a winning record. Um, and then Cincy after that
Just a
disappointing
killer
loss,
schedule coming up too. At
right? They play.
KC,
Yep,
then at home for Cleveland, who could still be fighting for, division spot or
something.
even, you know, the 5th seed at that point. I don't know, but yeah, just a really
But
hard schedule for them.
so then it's interesting, Larob. So it feels like the 4-5 is also set. It feels like Jacksonville and it feels like Cleveland going in. It feels like that will be the matchup. And we saw that matchup, and Cleveland kind of dominated this Jaguars team. To think they couldn't do it again. Now, a defense's second time facing Joe Flacco. Yeesh,
I
I
mean,
feel for
that
Joe.
Jaguars defense, Lewis, looked putrid
That's
the
true.
last couple of weeks.
I mean, against the Bake Show, what can you do? I'm all fire the cannons right now. So, um, but I don't know. A lot of I would probably bet Cleveland would be favored in that matchup. That's my prediction right
I would have
now.
to agree.
So then you would have Kansas City as the 3 seed, probably against Buffalo or Miami. I don't know, Jim.
That looked a little more homey to me, son. If
That
I
would
like
be a
Josh
very
Allen going to KC
interesting.
again,
I know, and any late game shenanigans from the Chiefs, are they going to complain at the end of this game after Mahomes throws 3 interceptions? So that would be a very interesting one. I could see the Bills being favored in that matchup if that is the matchup for that game. And then the 2-7, you'll probably have Miami or Buffalo taking on You mentioned the Colts or the Texans. I mean, not much of a chance of the AFC South teams in that matchup if I had to pick. But
potentially.
CJ Stroud, you can't count out the kid. So a lot of things to look forward to, Larab. Out of the AFC, I feel like there's a lot more of a contender pool here. There's a lot bigger of teams who could potentially get hot and make a run. Do you have a dark horse team that if they, hit all the right matchups, could find themselves in the Super Bowl?
Unfortunately, I do, and I think it has to be the Miami Dolphins. Now, I'm gonna stand up and say I was wrong about this Dolphins team. What I said on our predictions episode about them just getting steamrolled by the Cowboys. That's not what happened. They stood on business. Tua, when he needed to, went on that game-winning drive, which is in the closing moments of the game. And they had they had a kicker who had ice in his veins to make that last-second field goal. So props to them. And like you said, if they have to play some easy schedule, if they get the 2 seed and they're playing some AFC South team and they have a really easy schedule going forward in the playoffs, they could very well be in the Super Bowl now. Jalen Waddle gets injured every game and has to come out and starts the next game. Tyreek Hill still, lingering with that foot injury. But I think, with Jalen Ramsey, that could be the addition of the offseason if we see this Miami team make a deep run.
I know he's really come along as a huge piece for that defense. And, if Xavier Howard can hold his own, the defense has started to really pick it up, especially that pass rush, which really put a lot of pressure on Dak Prescott last week. So this team could be a dangerous and a playoff built team because they're able to run the ball and they can stop the run on both sides. So a lot of things going for them that they could get hot. I agree with you. I like Miami as a potential dark horse team. And, we're saying this in 2 weeks, they could be the 1 seed if they take care of business for the rest of the way. So, we could be saying this right now, and then they could be the prohibited favorite with a bye week. And then the AFC runs through Miami, which, if you're asking a few quarterbacks, that sounds kind of nice. But too bad Jared Goff is not in the AFC. Anything else you want to say about this AFC conference, Larob?
I just know it's going to be an amazing 2 weeks going forward, Lewis. But let's go ahead and move on to Thursday Night Football. Another great one to end off the Thursday Night Football for the rest of the year. The New York Jets traveling to Cleveland to play the Browns. Browns -7 in this one. And we saw this Jets team last week, Lewis, go up 21-0 on the Commanders and have to pull out a game-winning drive after blowing that huge lead to Jacoby Brissett. Now they're facing the Browns, who, missing a few key guys on defense, but still playing really good football. And Joe Flacco, resurgence year after coming in as a replacement. I really like the Browns in this one, Lewis. The Jets that really don't have anything to play for, besides some pride. And meanwhile, the Browns still trying, potentially have a chance to clinch or chance for their division and still clinch a playoff
No,
spot
they're
because
they're out of the division. Ravens clinched the division last night.
so they still are have a chance to clinch their playoff spot because there are only two
Oh,
teams
no, I'm
currently.
mistaken. I'm mistaken. If the Ravens lose out, then the Browns could still win the division. You are
Yeah,
correct.
so they're still going for the division, and also they haven't made the playoffs yet. Only two teams in the AFC have currently clinched a spot in the playoffs, and so they're going to be really want to win in this game. So I like the Browns at home, 29-10.
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you, Larob. The Browns have just been a lot better than the Jets all season long. Jets, maybe find something frisky within the offense, could maybe stage a little
Oh,
comeback,
a
but
couple
not
Brees
against
Hall checkdowns.
that Browns defense. Yeah, well, we don't want that to happen. Once Brees Hall gets injured in the first quarter, it's gonna look ugly for that team. But yeah, I think Browns take care of their business and look good heading into the playoffs. I'm going to do Browns 18 to Jets 5 in this ball game. I also like the fun scores. All right, Laurel, well, that's going to do it for today's episode. Lots of really interesting stuff that we got into today. We are 2 weeks away from being in the playoffs, and I'm going to have a surprise come playoff time with maybe a new setup. We'll see what happens there,
Oh,
Laurav.
oh.
But yeah, anything you want to say before we head out of here today?
No, I think that's the first one on podcast signing off.
Peace.